I want you to take a little trip down memory lane with me. Think back to the time between your 10th and 14th birthdays. Now, on average, that means that you were in 5th through 9th grade. Now, for kids today, this is the last year of elementary school. It's all of middle school and that first year of high school. When I was a kid, 5th and 6th grade were actually the last 2 years of elementary school. 7th and 8th were junior high school, and 9th was the first year of high school. So what was that time like for you? Looking back, is it known for anything iconic? It definitely was an iconic time for me because that was between the years 1978 and 1983, or what is referred to as the golden age of the arcade. Yep, I grew up during the height of arcades. I have some really distinct and special memories of arcade games in those years. After ball games, I played both football and baseball. We would often go to Pizza Hut. There was almost always either a Galaga, Space Invaders, Missile Command, or Pac-Man machine in the restaurant. Now you throw on some Billy Squier or Rick James from the jukebox and then sip some cold Dr. Pepper from those red pebbled plastic glasses. I mean, seriously, what could be better? When I was in junior high, I walked to and from school every single day, passing a tiny little convenience store on the way. And there was always an asteroid and centipede game inside that little store. The roller rink, which I frequented almost every single weekend, had tons of arcade games inside as well. I mean, it was really a special time to grow up. In fact, some of the greatest arcade games of all time were released during those years. In 1978, it was Space Invaders. 1979, Asteroids. In 1980, it was Defender, Missile Command, Rally X, and, of course, Pac-Man. In 1981, it was Centipede, Donkey Kong, Galaga, and Frogger. In 1982, Pole Position. 1983, Dragon's Lair, and Mario Brothers. Now, of those I just mentioned, Donkey Kong, Asteroids, Defender, and Space Invaders are all listed in the top 10 highest grossing arcade games of all time. Of course, the one game that puts all the rest of those to shame in terms of being a truly iconic moneymaker was Pac-Man. With 400,000 arcade cabinets sold and a total revenue of, get this, $3.5 billion. Now, if you adjust that for inflation, that's nearly $8 billion today. No other arcade game from the Golden Age can match those kinds of numbers. Pac-Man was born on May 22, 1980. It was the brainchild of Toru Iwatani, a developer at the Japanese gaming company Namco. Now, in those days, arcades were mostly where guys hung out, and as Iwatani says, quote, all the games were mostly about beating up aliens, end quote. So that's when he started thinking about making a game with simple rules that would also appeal to those who didn't typically play video games. So he decided to make a game around the theme of eating, influenced by popular cartoons of that era. In addition to one of his favorites as a kid, a Japanese comic book called Obaki no Kotaro, Iwatani also took inspiration from Casper the Friendly Ghost. It should be easy to see how that got worked into the game. The playful fights between frenemies Tom and Jerry, and the ability to fight back against the bad guys by eating, which was inspired by Popeye and his spinach. The name Pac-Man comes from a Japanese onomatopoeia called Pakspaku, as in, and I know I'm going to butcher this, but here's my best shot at it, Pakspaku tabaru, which means to eat voraciously or gobble down. That's where the name came from. Pac-Man took in $1 billion in quarters on 100,000 arcade games during the first 15 months after it was introduced. Pac-Man fever swept the nation. I mean, you could literally buy just about anything Pac-Man themed. Board games, sheets for your bed, calendars, sticker books, telephones, lunchboxes, etc. 2 years later, Buckner and Garcia, a duo with a string of novelty songs already to their credit, capitalized on the video game craze and wrote the song Pac-Man Fever, which peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 in March 1982. So why am I talking about all this arcade history? Well, partially, I confess, it's just to make you jealous if you weren't blessed enough to have grown up in the era of superior music, roller skating, and arcades. But mostly, for me, Pac-Man makes a pretty good analogy of how life and our brains work. But first, let me review the basics from both neuroscience and psychology, based on some work by Dr. David Rock. In 2008, Dr. Rock, who's the co-founder and CEO of the Neuro Leadership Institute, developed what he calls the SCARF model of human social experience. In his paper, SCARF, a brain-based model for collaborating with and influencing others, Dr. Rock explains that there are 5 specific areas of human social experience that influence our behavior in social situations. He says our brains are constantly scanning our environment, looking for threats or rewards to those same 5 areas. These 5 form the acronym SCARF. S stands for status. Now, socially, I'm asking, what is my relative importance to others? In other words, where am I in the pecking order? This correlates to Maslow's sense of esteem. C, certainty. This is our brain's ability to predict patterns in social situations. Our brains love familiarity. They love clarity and predictability. In Maslow's hierarchy, this is about making us feel safe. A, autonomy. This is our sense of control over our environment, that feeling of free will or choice borrowed from self-determination theory. R, relatedness. This is how connected we feel with others, featured in both Maslow's hierarchy and in self-determination theory as our sense of belonging. And a 5th element unique to the SCARF model is F, fairness. How fair we perceive the exchanges between people to be. Now, this model is based on neuroscience research that implies that these 5 things activate the same threat and reward responses in our brain that we rely on for physical survival, stimulating the same exact region of the brain as physical pain. In other words, our brain is sending out the signal that we're in danger, so our brains interpret a threat to status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, or fairness as an actual threat to our survival. This definitely could help explain some of the strong emotional reactions I have in certain social situations, and why it can at times be so hard to control those reactions. According to Dr. Rock, it's part of our nature and not something we can just turn on and off with ease. On the other hand, when we feel rewarded in any of those 5 areas, our brains release dopamine, that happy hormone. And when that happens, we want more, so we seek out ways to get that reward again and again and again and again. Now, back to our game of Pac-Man. I don't know about you, but for me, life can often feel like a maze, littered with a literal flood of sensory dots or inputs, bombarding my brain every day, all day. Pac-Man is like the human brain, constantly scanning the environment, gobbling up those sensory dots. Among that sensory information, there are both rewards and threats, and the basic rewards and threats are easily identifiable for any of us who wants to learn. The 4 ghosts are individual threats to our status, certainty, autonomy, and relatedness. Now, if there were a 5th ghost, it would represent a threat to our sense of fairness. When our brains think someone or something is a threat to status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, or fairness, it feels like a threat to our very survival. Those ghosts are trying to take our lives. And when that happens too many times, it could feel like game over. But if you and I can learn to recognize the patterns, avoid those ghostly threats, and take advantage of the rewards, times when our sense of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness is reinforced, then we win. But it isn't just about you and me, is it? It's about those around us as well. Consider just one of the 5. Dr. Rock's special emphasis on how our brains hunger for fairness and are always looking to gobble down rewarding examples thereof. James chapter 2, verses 1 through 5 says, quote, "My brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. For if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in, and if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and say, 'You sit here in a good place,' while you say to the poor man, 'You stand over there,' or sit down at my feet. Have you not then made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he's promised to those who love him? End quote. Being treated fairly, regardless of our status in society, is a hunger that God himself built into each of us, which is why as believers, we have a golden rule duty to treat others fairly as well. As Jesus himself said in Matthew 7:12, "Therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them, for this is the law and the prophets." And that's just one small example. So today, I'm reminding myself and you that it's okay if we've got a little Pac-Man fever in us. In this case, at least, it can help us get that better mind that always leads to a better life.